Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weep Union, and in this one we have several Russian advances here on the eastern section of the front line. The Russians have managed to expand their foothold across the Usk River line in the Kupiansk direction. They've managed to expand their foothold across the Serpets River line in the Liman direction. Russians have also managed to advance here to the north of Bakhmut in the direction of the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk direction along the canal north of Chasiv Yar. The Russians have also managed to advance further within Toretsk, having almost the entire city under their control. The Russians have advanced into the southwestern flank of Pokrovsk, in the southern flank of Korokhove, and in the direction of Velyka Novosilka, where the Russians have managed to advance to the northeast of the settlement, and they have managed to capture the village of Neskuchne in the southwestern flank of Velyka Novosilka. With this, the Russians now only have Velyka Novosilka and Velykka before they control this important road junction intersecting the Donetsk region and the city of Donetsk with the Zaporizhia region and the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region. The Russians continued offensive operations here with the capture of Neskuchne following the control over the high ground and fortified positions northwest of the settlement, and with the already old control over the eastern parts of the settlement. The Russians have managed to pressure the Ukrainian forces for withdrawal from Neskuchne under heavy fire by Russian forces, which led to the capture of the settlement. The Russians are now fighting at the outskirts of Remivka and Velyka Novosilka, both from the southwestern direction, southeastern direction, and northeastern direction. The Russians, following the capture of the fortified positions east of Velyka Novosilka, are now attacking both from the Novy Komar direction and the eastern direction. This likely indicates that the past few weeks and months of hitting the Ukrainian supply lines in the areas has had a strong effect on the Ukrainian positions in the area, their supply lines, and their combatability, which has led to the Russians attacking it from multiple directions, gaining control over Neskuchne and some of the surrounding forest lines into the outskirts of Velyka Novosilka itself. The Russians still need to fight over the fortified positions northwest of Velyka Novosilka, which overlooks the settlement, and fighting within Velyka Novosilka and Remivka would be exposed to the Ukrainian positions northwest. However, if the Russians are fighting over Velyka Novosilka and Remivka, directing the fire of the Ukrainian forces from the fortified positions, the Russians will still have the ability to flank the fortified positions from the eastern direction, and with pushes further towards Novosilka and onwards towards the fortified positions from the western direction as well, they'll be able to exert heavy pressure on the Ukrainian positions there and gain control over not just Velyka Novosilka and Remivka, but also the fortified position if they gather enough forces in the area. The Russians are also managing to advance south of Korokhove following the capture of the city. They are now fighting over Yantarne, which managed to gain control over the entire village and the fortified position in the area. With this, the Ukrainians have no other significant positions in the southern flank of Korokhove. Instead, they have the settlement of Dashne and Ulekli in between the Vovcha river line and the Sukhyeli river line, and the remaining fortified positions of Korokhove and the fortified position in between these two villages. In general, the situation is very sad for the Ukrainians here near Korokhove. In the western flank and in between Pokrovsk and Korokhove, the Russians have made several advances. They've managed to advance south of Yasenove as they expand their zone of control towards Andrivka, with a push directly from the east and now also from the northern direction towards the settlement, even before they managed to capture Yasenove. Their objective is to gain control over the supply road towards Andrivka and fight over Andrivka itself, rather than Yasenove is simply a byproduct by it being in the way. The Russians also started advancing west of Novojelizavetsivka in the direction of Nadiivka, bypassing the fortified position from the southern direction along the urban area. We see that there are more buildings and forest lines in between the two settlements. The Russians are advancing alongside them, and with their positions in the eastern direction, they'll be able to flank the fortified position from the rear, or do a pincer maneuver from the northern and southern direction at the same time. In either case, the Russians will continue their offensive operations towards Nadiivka and the fortified positions near them, all the way towards the Dnieper region's borderline. The Russians have also managed to advance further northwest of Solone, capturing the waste heap there, within close proximity to the fortified position south of Odashne, before an assault directly towards the village. There's also a possibility of the Russians combining efforts from Novosilka in the east and the Solona direction from the north to do a pincer maneuver towards Uspenivka and fight further along the Solona River, again towards the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast border area. The Russians continue their operations in the western direction before they storm Pokrovsk directly head on. There is several offensive operations going on towards Pokrovsk, but they are secondary compared to the primary objective, which is cutting off the supplies going in and out of Pokrovsk from the western direction, both towards the cities of Zaporizhia and Dnipro. The Russians have managed to advance further within Selene to gain full control over the first line of defense here south of Pokrovsk. They are looking to gain control over Chasiv Yar, Dusivka, and Selene, and have managed to advance further within the settlement here, with the fortified positions to the south of Solona River gaining control over Selene, and the fortified positions here will allow the Russians to have a secure flank for further pushes along the railways towards Pokrovsk, both in the southeastern direction and the southwestern direction, for them to continue offensive operations towards the city. The city of Pokrovsk is being attacked from 3 separate directions. The Russian offensive operations to the east for the road between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, the Russian offensive operations to the west towards the roads between Pokrovsk and Zaporizhia and Pokrovsk and Dnipro, and then the attack directly head on. The Russians will likely expand towards Milorad as well in the east of the city to gain control over that as well, and continue their offensive operations towards this road connection between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk. The objective is to gain full control over this entire area before pushing to flank the Konstantinivka-Sloviansk line, which is the final and main defensive line of the Ukrainians into the Donetsk region. The fighting is already going on in the direction of this defensive line, with the Russian push through Toretsk, where they have managed to gain control over more of the Ukrainian outskirts, which leaves only this small area remaining under Ukrainian control of the city of Toretsk. The Russians will likely capture this within the next few days. The fortified position may take a little longer, and then fighting will go on for Krymsk in the northeastern direction as well. Within the next week or two, the Russians will likely have full control over the entire Toretsk city and the fortified positions around it. This will lead to control over Shcherbinivka and further offensive operations in the western direction, as well as further offensive operation along the railways towards Dashne and Dilyivka. In the meantime, the Russians also continued offensive operations in the Chasiv Yar direction, where the situation is a lot more stable. The Russians are slowly sieging the Ukrainian positions in the industrial area and apartment complex area in the central parts of the city. At the same time, the Russians have started new offensive operations in the direction of Orehovo-Vasilivka, gaining a foothold within the eastern parts of the settlement and fighting through it. The Russians are here looking to, following the capture of Ryurivka, gain further control of the canal line upwards towards Privilya, further securing the canal as a frontline position and flanking the Siversk, which would turn into a pocket if the Russians continue offensive operations towards Liman and the northern flank of Chasiv Yar. With control over Chasiv Yar, the Russians would have control over the high ground, fighting along the flank of the fortified positions along the canal, all the way up to the Severodonetsk River, east of the main defensive line of the Ukrainians. And with a combined assault in the north towards Liman to gain control over that, the Russians would have control over the northern bank of the Severodonetsk River as well. This will lead to a complete cut-off of the Siversk section of the front line, which is or has been shown so far in this conflict to be the most stable section of the front line. Russians have managed to advance further along the western bank of the Serbis River line, gaining control of an additional fortified position of the Ukrainians and some more of the forest lines and forest patches in the area, expanding their foothold and expanding their ability to launch further offensive operations along the defensive lines of the Ukrainians north of Liman to fight in the direction of Borova from the southern direction, gaining control over the fortified positions here along the Serbis River line, and then push onwards towards the Uska River line from the southern direction, isolating Borova and the surrounding areas. The Russians have also managed to advance in the western bank of the Uska River line, gaining control over the remaining parts of the hills south of the Voryshne, as the Russians continue their offensive operations to gain control over the town and the village of Zapatne, to gain control over a pretty hefty area in the western bank of the Uska River line for future offensive operations towards Kupiansk just south of it. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.